Hi, and welcome to the November edition of The Coffee House, where in the next hour, the inter-county connector is dead, but what lies ahead? Two views on Coffee House Forum. State Attorney General Joe Curran comes to Tacoma Park to endorse a handgun ban. Also, high-tech treatments for infertility on In Sickness and in Health. Singer-songwriter Steve Gelman joins us for musical traditions, and stadium financing expert John Morgan on Camden Yards, the Ravens Stadium, and who will pay for a new D.C. baseball park. Plus, Pat Afterheide reviews the film Dogma, a Laurie Tsang poem, and the top 10 lists of book sales and video rentals. Hi, and welcome to the Coffee House. An environmental disaster. That's what Maryland Governor Parris Glendening labeled the proposed inter-county connector meant to link I-270 and I-95 north of the Beltway. And in late September, the governor ordered the state to sell off lands acquired to build the controversial east-west highway. The decision to pave over the ICC was immediately attacked by business groups and politicians seeking to woo these business groups. Montgomery County Executive Doug Duncan, a very likely candidate for governor in 2 years, blasted Glendening for seeking to appease a handful of people who don't want roads built anywhere. Duncan was apparently referring to environmentalists, who applauded Glendening's decision, but with one hand. That's because the governor still supports the construction of 2 parkways that would cover 10 of the 18 miles planned for the ICC. But these parkways would not traverse the environmentally sensitive Paint Branch and Northwest Branch rivers. With us in the Coffee House to discuss the post-ICC future are Prince George's County Councilman Peter Shapiro, who supports the governor's ICC decision, and Gus Bauman, representing the Greater Washington Board of Trade, who does not. But before we look ahead, let's take a drive from Gaithersburg to Laurel, the commute the ICC was meant to ease. Here's Ross.
It's a Thursday morning in October, 10 past 7. I'm at Frederick Avenue and Redland Road on a trip from Gaithersburg to Laurel. This is the problem route that's convinced some traffic planners and business leaders that an inter-county connector is needed to ease east-west congestion between Montgomery and Prince George's counties. But early on, the drive is pretty easygoing. I've been on the road for 10 minutes. Traffic's moving along this 2-lane stretch of Needwood Road.
I got a call from Adrian. Be careful. You're going to hit a delay at Greencastle and then Randolph Road past New Hampshire Avenue. By the way, at Briggs Cheney and Old Columbia Pike, the traffic signals are not cooperating.
With the help of radio traffic reports, I'm thinking maybe I can avoid a logjam, but no such luck today. As I attempt to exit Needwood Road onto Muncaster Mill Road, cars are suddenly bumper to bumper. This is the route that I'm sure many people take going across county from Gaithersburg to Laurel, and this is what you have to deal with every day, long lines and backed up traffic. There are new traffic signals at this busy intersection. It's just that they're not yet working. But after a few minutes, I'm moving again. We're about a half an hour into our trip from Gaithersburg to Laurel, and we've seen some pretty heavy traffic in some areas. We're at Georgia and Norbeck right now. As you can see, traffic is pretty brisk here, but everything seems to be moving along slowly but surely. People are making their way to the office. Once again, a long line of traffic slows as I approach the intersection of Norwood Road and Baltimore Road.
For Democracy Boulevard, traffic now waiting in line to join the delay, heading across the American Legion Bridge and into Tysons. And pay attention now.
It's about 8 o'clock and I'm finally approaching downtown Laurel on Sandy Spring Road. Traffic is flowing smoothly, though the streets are still pretty busy. From start to finish, the trip from Gaithersburg to Laurel took me about 50 minutes. For the Coffee House, I'm Ross Adams.
Thanks, Ross. Of course, only a handful of people actually travel all the way from 270 I-95. Most of the people go to work in between there, somewhere in between there. And in reality, I guess, the ICC corridor isn't all that unusual in the D.C. area because D.C. is the second most congested roads in the country, has the second most congested roads in the country. Gus, isn't it really building roads to solve gridlock? Isn't that a little bit like letting out your belt to solve obesity?
No. But it's a nice metaphor.
Thanks.
You're welcome. People often ask me, I used to chair the Park and Planning Commission, and people would often ask, where did the ICC come from? And I said, it's the one road that's still there after all the other roads got taken off over the years that most people felt was necessary. And the reason is that there was no way to get back and forth between the two development corridors, I-270 and I-95, that we had planned 4 years ago to concentrate business, stores, housing. There was no way to get back and forth between them. And that was the reason it was there. The Beltway was never meant to take care of that traffic. And so what's going to happen next, I think there are some things that we can predict are going to happen in light of what the governor has done. But if you're asking whether or not there was ever a need for a connector between the two interstates, I think the answer is clearly yes. That's why it was on the county master plan. That's why it's still on the county master plan.
And the governor said no to it, but you're with the Board of Trade. Is the Board of Trade prepared to live within the governor's decision, or
Well,
is this a matter of waiting until there's a new administration in Annapolis and bringing it out again?
You know, this issue about the intercounty connector has been around for so long.
50 years.
That's right. That it's not going to live or die in the next year or two, no matter who the governor is. Most people, every poll ever taken shows that most people in the county, most voters in the county want a connector. Everyone can argue over what should it be, a 4-lane parkway, a 6-lane highway. The master plan that we did many years ago shows the road, a transit way, the hiker-biker trail, and it was meant to carry all this regional traffic, which was never meant to be on these local roads that your tape just showed. You see, those local roads were never meant to carry all this regional traffic. That's why there was a connector on the plan. Without a connector, I can tell you what I think is going to happen. Given what the governor has recommended now, with a piece on the east and a piece on the west, for the short term, if that happens, the middle portion, those local roads, 108, 28, Norwood, Briggs Cheney, Randolph Road, they are really going to be engulfed with regional traffic.
The governor attempts to deal with that somehow by expanding intersections and attempting to do improvements to some of those roads.
But all of our studies at the Park and Planning Commission that we did showed that, I mean, we would have loved to have been able to say an intersection improvement would take care of the problem, but it's not going to.
This past summer, there were 41 days of ozone problems in the Washington area, which is to say that serious health problems to the elderly, to children, to people with respiratory problems. And ozone is largely, or not largely necessarily, but significantly caused by auto exhaust. Auto exhaust is also one of the 3 major causes of sources of carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas, which causes global warming. And Americans are driving their cars more, not less, according to studies. And EPA was recently out with a study indicating that the American vehicle fleet is actually losing ground in terms of fuel efficiency. We're going backwards, not forwards. Given all of that, is this the time to be building roads?
I'm struck by when, Mark, you said that there's been a decrease in fuel efficiency, and in my mind, as I was driving over here, all I could see was an army of sports utility vehicles, and it's hard for me not to attribute at least some of that to these vehicles, which don't have the fuel efficiency standards as other vehicles. But in short, I look at the intercounty connector, and what I see is an outer beltway, and I think that I can't imagine anything that would be more destructive to the quality of life of people who live, especially in my district, in inner beltway community in Prince George's County, than a second beltway. We have enough problems with one beltway and the stigma of inner beltway communities. Imagine what a second beltway would do. I look at the intercounty connector and I'm not sure what problem that's supposed to solve. The Council of Governments, the Transportation Planning Board, the statistics that came out around easing congestion have showed that the intercounty connector does not ease congestion. You know, at best it might hold off, might slow down the increase of congestion. The only solution that we have, the only solution to the congestion and gridlock problem is to reduce the number of vehicle miles traveled. That's not going to be done by building a second Beltway.
In rejecting the ICC, Governor Glendening said, mass transit is, without a doubt, the future of transportation in the Washington region. And he says he wants to double the number of miles that people travel in transit by the year 2020. Do you think that's realistic? Is that a pipe dream? Is that too little?
It's very realistic. It comes down to the amount of investment we as a government are willing to make in public transportation. Right now, our investment in public transportation relative to our investment in new roads is paltry. And that's what has to change. I look at the Intercounty Connector and I think again about the community in which I live, which part of it is along University Boulevard, which extends into Montgomery County, goes to the University of Maryland and beyond. And it seems that people talk about a purple line, an additional line for the metro. It seems
now,
like
this would be connecting Silver Spring, College Park, New Carrollton.
Yeah, the Georgetown branch, which is being talked about.
And it's light rail as opposed to metro train type.
Well, your county executive actually seems to favor heavy rail. I disagree with him. I think that light rail is cheaper, it's more pedestrian friendly. It will do more for community revitalization, so I would favor light rail. But I wouldn't take it from Bethesda to Silver Spring. I would take it from Bethesda to Silver Spring, through Langley Park, over to University of Maryland, over to New Carrollton. And then what we've done is we've built a public transit inner beltway. That seems to me smart transportation policy, and that kind of investment will drive redevelopment.
Will the Board of Trade support something like
Well,
that?
you know, I'm not speaking for the Board of Trade here, but let me tell you the reality of transportation. And I'm speaking as one who has 4 drivers in my household. We got 2 cars. Metro is our 3rd car. That's how I get around, is on Metro. But I know what the commuting habits are of this region. You have couples who work in 2 different places, going off in 2 different directions constantly. We're sitting on the I-95 corridor with millions of trips coming through on I-95 corridor, which means onto the Beltway. Then we've the fact that we are the nation's capital, receiving millions of visitors who tend to come here largely by cars. So we are inundated by all these vehicles. There's no way, even if we doubled transit use, there's no way we're going to accommodate what the need is out there. We have many transit plans out there. I can't even get the ones on the master plans implemented. The Georgetown branch that you talk about, that's the easiest to implement. It's only 4 miles long. Government owns the right-of-way, can't get it built. And, this ICC, at least, had a transitway in it and a roadway in it. And the government owns about 60% of that right-of-way.
But can't get it built either.
Well, they could get it built if you let it go through the process. To see, a lot of people are afraid to let it go through the EIS process because
environmental impact statement
process. They don't want it to get through the process because it's just possible that it would receive all the necessary permits from the federal, state, and local governments. The great irony to what's going on here is what has happened is that we have stopped a process in which you look at all the alternatives, weigh all the alternatives, and make a decision at the end. We have stopped that process. Now what we're going to have is massive traffic congestion. We're never going to get that kind of transit use because those of us working in transit have a transit system here that feeds 500,000 people on radio corridors. And the Purple Line, we can't get the Purple Line going yet because there's no agreement on it, there's no right-of-way, and that is a fundamental problem.
Transportation policy is more than simply a transit or a moving people issue, though. It's also a development issue.
It's a density issue. You have to have densities where you can take it in. The brake problem that we're dealing with here, people don't like sprawl. They also don't like density.
Well, you have different problems in different parts of the region. In the western part of the region, you have a problem with sprawl. That's the wealthier area. That's where most of the development is happening. There was a Brookings study recently that came out that indicated that if you were to draw a line at 16th Street in the district, everything east of that, inside the Beltway, in Peters area, Prince George's County, you have in some ways underdevelopment. And to the west of that, you have overdevelopment. Wouldn't it make sense to be thinking about a transportation policy that were to encourage development in that area east of 16th Street?
We want to link jobs. We want to link jobs to people, and the other way around. And that's the only way the only viable way that I see doing that is through public transportation. Though Gus, I agree with you that it might be possibly more feasible to build the intercounty connector and it might be quicker than to build public transportation. the fact that it's easier to do doesn't make it the right thing to do.
But we need both. See, the problem is we're out of balance now.
We
are really out of balance.
I can't understand what solution the intercounty connector solves. It doesn't, by objective planning standards and by the modeling that's done to look at what's happening with congestion, it doesn't seem to solve the problem that it's even intended to solve, which is, for, as best as I can tell, providing access from the high-tech corridor in 270 over to BWI and what is a budding high-tech corridor along 95.
I'm afraid that's going to have to be the last word. We've run out of time.
All right.
Many thanks to Prince George's County Council member Peter Shapiro and the Washington Board of Trade's Gus Bauman for joining me in the coffee house. Still to come, high-tech treatments for infertility. Singer-songwriter Steve Gelman had after Heidi reviews the film Dogma, a Laurie Tsang poem, and the benefits and costs of taxpayer-financed stadiums in Baltimore and D.C. But first,
this initiative, and you've got spokespeople within the council who are raising the issue. That's what should be done. Elevate the discussion, challenge the thinking. You've laid out a roadmap where you think we can all live safer. If someone has a better idea, where is it? And again, if we've got somewhere around 223 million weapons in Americans' hands, we are the safest nation on earth, and but I don't think that's the case, and I think we ought to at least challenge that thinking, and maybe, just maybe, a decade from now or 2 decades from now, things will be different. But if you don't start, it's never going to change. And Jamie, I applaud your start, and let's get this movement moving. It's a first step, but then again, any great goal has to start somewhere, and I'm happy it's starting in Maryland.
Chicken wings for our Sunday cookout. Could you marinate me some fierce, girl? So here I am, wielding my cleaver against the useless appendages of these spiteless winged creatures, now on wings. Break it at the joint, force it back until the white knob cartilage pops out, slice between bone, the second and third, discard and cut. Now between the first and second. That was cottage joint, but no one could asunder sinew, muscle, flesh, bone. They never could fly anyway. And onto Yulan's house in Guangzhou, they sat nestled in a basket. The frogs twitching in a net bag, the sea bass swimming in the tub. Later, one goes over the edge of the balcony, lands in the street, and runs. soul separates from the body. Aroma of meat roasting, spirit rising up, stars above, fire below, warm blanket of night. But now, dismembered limbs lie before me in a heap, each piece severed from the rest, their mates. The original chicken's hack, parts dispatched in plastic to anonymous kitchens. Now to season, do it with your fingers, get your hands dirty. The jerk spices, garlic, siyao, shot of dark rum, cane, sweating blood, libation for the chicken spirits, diaspora of flesh and bone. Diaspora of flesh and bone. Flesh and bone. Flesh and bone.
Hi, and welcome to In Sickness and in Health at the Coffee House. Infertility, the inability to have a baby, affects 1 in 10 couples on average. Until quite recently, if infertile couples wanted children, their only option was to adopt. But now, thanks to advances in a field called reproductive endocrinology, there's new hope that infertility can be conquered through high-tech birthing techniques, although they're far from a sure bet and far from cheap. Still, this is fact, not science fiction. A grandmother in Australia gave birth to her granddaughter. Young women can have their eggs removed and frozen until they're ready to have children, potentially even in their 60s. And healthy sperm can be harvested from sterile men to fertilize an egg. Here to talk about the latest reproductive technology is Dr. Frank Tsang of the Mid-Atlantic Fertility Centers in Bethesda. Dr. Tsang, welcome to the Coffee House.
Thank you very much.
Now, infertility at one stage was regarded as the woman's problem, but that is not at all the case, is it, these days?
No, we estimate that probably 30 to 40% of problems with the infertile couple are actually due to male factor problems. So certainly we can't always assume that it's a female problem.
Yeah. Some of the headline stories that have come forward, for instance, the septuplets, perhaps don't hold the same fascination for doctors as yourself. In fact, can you give a few comments on that event?
Yeah, well actually, although that did get a lot of publicity, and fortunately it was a very good outcome, it's certainly not something that we wish to have happen at all. And our goal actually is to achieve pregnancy successfully, but to have hopefully the goal being one healthy child and not more. So a lot of things that we're doing in infertility today is directed really towards that goal of having one healthy child. All too often what people forget is that there are many complications that are associated with having more than one child, and that is even true with twins. And although many twins do fine, certainly once you get to 3, 4, 5, and in the case of 7, more times than not you're actually dealing with tremendous problems, both financially as well as socially.
So someone who really wants a child badly gets too many at once,
Right.
and then ends up losing them all, which is even a really sad event.
Right.
One of the cutting-edge technologies that I'd like you to talk about is blastocyst transfer, which is in part designed to reduce the problem of multiple births.
Right. Blastocyst transfer is a relatively new idea that within the past few years has really gotten to be a lot more popular. And the reason for that is that blastocysts are a stage of embryo development which is really about 5 to 6 days from the time that we normally retrieve the eggs. So a patient, for instance, who's going through in vitro fertilization will normally undergo an egg retrieval process. That same day she'll have fertilization of those eggs. And from that point on, the embryos will develop. And on the first and the second day, we'll actually see that fertilization has taken place. And dividing embryos are noted on the second day. And traditionally, we put embryos back in on the second and the third day. The problem, though, is that it's very difficult to know which embryos are good on the second and third day. That is, which embryos will go on and have the best chance of implanting. If you can wait longer, 5 or 6 days, you'll probably reduce the multiple pregnancy rate, because you'll better be able to pick out those embryos that have a good chance to continue the developmental process. So the whole idea behind blastocyst transfer is not really that we're taking a marginal embryo or one that isn't very good and making it better, but we're hopefully increasing the ability to select out those embryos that have the best chance of going on.
Okay,
So instead of putting in 3 or 4, now we can put in 1 or 2.
So it's in the test tube for, say, 6 days instead of 3, and the toughest survive, basically, to that stage.
Yes, it's allowing us, because we know that probably 30 to 40% of embryos on the 3rd day, which again is the day that we usually put them in today, will make it to blastocyst stage. So if you can then say, okay, if 60 to 70% don't make it, and we don't have to worry about putting those in, but we select out 1 or 2 of the very best embryos, then you're not in a position where you have to feel like you have to put in 3 or 4. So I think that's probably going to be the major advantage of blastocyst transfer. Hopefully we will see very, very few triplets and quadruplets by doing blastocyst transfer.
And septuplets will be a thing of the past.
It should be, but one has to realize also that a lot of these multiple pregnancies, particularly in the case of septuplets, really were not from IVF procedures. And IVF procedures, in vitro fertilization procedures, are those that we can extract the eggs and then decide how many we're going to put back in. The septuplets actually were conceived through a process called intrauterine insemination and controlled ovarian hyperstimulation.
So the eggs were never taken out.
They were never taken out, so there was really no ability to say, okay, we're only going to put in 3 or 4.
I'd like to move on, if we could, to a very cutting-edge male technology. ICSI it's called, which perhaps you could explain and briefly what it is.
ICSI stands for intracytoplasmic sperm injection, and what that refers to is a procedure where literally we take 1 sperm and inject it into the egg with a micropipette.
Let's have a look at a video. We have an illustration of this going on. Perhaps you can explain it as we go along.
The procedure involves isolating a single sperm, and what we're seeing here is actually loading up a small glass pipette with a single sperm. And in this process here, we're actually using a little suction device to hold the egg there, which is about 80 micrometers in diameter, so it's highly magnified here. We're holding it in place with the pipette, and then under the microscope, we're using this needle here that contains the single sperm. The egg is being rotated there, so the polar body, which is that structure at 12 o'clock underneath that coating, is aligned so that the injection procedure can take place. We have to align it properly, because in that alignment we have much better fertilization rates. And with these procedures, we can actually isolate sperm from men who have very few sperm. And here we see the pipette is actually inserted into the ooplasm, and we're aspirating a little bit out just to ensure that we've actually penetrated the membrane. That ensures that the placement of the needle is correct. And then the single sperm is then released into the ooplasm right about now. Once that occurs, the pipette is withdrawn and the sperm is left in place. The following morning, about 18 hours later, we should be able to determine that fertilization has taken place. So this procedure has actually proven to be very successful for men who have very few sperm. In fact, it can be done for men who have no sperm in the ejaculate. As long as it's considered sterile in the past, but not today, as long as we can identify a few sperm, even in testicular tissue. So some men will actually undergo a biopsy procedure to identify a few immature sperm, isolate that sperm, and then inject it.
And you're saying spinal cord injuries as well as...
Yes, a very gratifying part of our practice is to treat men who have suffered spinal cord injuries. And until recently, those men could not ejaculate, but using special devices, we can actually extract semen from them, and then using that sperm, we can either do what's called intrauterine and sperm injection into the uterus or into the egg, the ICSI procedure. And that's proven to be quite successful.
So we're running out of time here, but there's more to come in this field.
Yeah, I think the goal, and a lot of the research is really directed towards achieving the goal of having not only successful pregnancy, but trying to do so in a safe manner, both for the patient. So drug research is being done right now to try to minimize the drug exposure to women and some of the attendant side effects that we see, such as hyperstimulation, but also to try to achieve the goal of having one healthy pregnancy and not more.
It's a valid goal. Well, a big thank you to Dr. Frank Tsang of the Mid-Atlantic Fertility Centers for getting us up to speed on the latest treatments for infertility. I'm Kathy Christensen, and this has been In Sickness and in Health.
Just ahead, the controversial new film Dogma, also singer-songwriter Steve Gelman, and who pays and who profits from pro stadiums in Baltimore and D.C.
You find yourself approaching the millennium thinking more often about angels and devils and even God herself, well, then you might be a filmmaker, because spiritual creatures are invading our cineplexes. You won't find any millennial movie that's more in your face than Kevin Smith's Dogma. In fact, it's benefiting from boatloads of free publicity from angry Catholic organizations. They think it's pretty disrespectful to the Catholic Church. And it is. It really is. I mean, the heroine is a doubting Catholic who works as a doctor in an abortion clinic. The actor who plays the Catholic bishop is George Carlin, the comic who's famous for the 7 dirty words on live radio. And we get to meet a 13th apostle we never heard of before. In real life, he's the comic Chris Rock. Of course we never heard of him before. He's black, and he knows that's why he didn't get into the Bible. Does this lineup look like an apostle, a prophet, and a muse to you? It does in the movie Dogma. I was ready for raunchiness with this movie. The director is Kevin Smith. He made Clerks and Mallrats and Chasing Amy, and he's seen as the voice of a disillusioned slacker generation. But what I was not prepared for is that this is a real believers movie, and in the end it's touching. Along the way, it's a live-action cartoon with supernatural bad boys acting up all over the place. It all starts with a couple of wiseacre angels. That would be the pre-tested team of Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. So they were bad, they got banished to Wisconsin, and now they spend their time hanging out at the Milwaukee airport.
Why do you feel the need to come to this place all the time? My friend, because this is humanity at its best. Look at them. All that anger, all that mistrust, all that unhappiness. Forgotten for that one perfect moment when they get off the plane. See those two? What that guy doesn't know is that the girl cheated on him while she was away. She did? Twice. Nice. But it doesn't matter right now because they're just both so relieved to be with one another. I like that.
They think they've figured out a way to wiggle back into heaven. Trouble is, if they do, they'll have conned God. Since the world rests on the fact of God's omnipotence, this would destroy the universe. Enter free will, in the shape of Linda Fiorentino as Bethany, the doubting Catholic. She gets teamed up with a band of allies, including 2 jerky adolescents who actually are prophets. On the way, there's a monster who oozes out of a toilet, a throwing off the train sequence, a blow away the bartender scene, and mass slaughter at a press conference. This is a movie loaded with hapless humans and the supernatural creatures who envy them for their free will. And God loves them. That's a pretty traditional message, even if the way Smith gets there isn't. For me, there was something endearing about seeing the grand issues of human existence worked out by the hapless, the mute, and the perplexed. Relentlessly sophomoric humor is one approach to the gap between what we are and what we dream, hope, and fear. It worked for me. Meanwhile, if you don't want to leave home, try renting a movie that won high praise, justifiably, when it was in the theaters, The Harmonists. It's a German film, but the subtitles sure don't get in the way of the story, which is about the rise and fall of a pop music phenomenon. The comedian Harmonists were a top singing group in the late 20s and early 30s in Berlin, which at the time was a creative cultural capital. The group took American jazz and mixed it up with German pop songs for sophisticated Berlin audiences. Here, watch the moment when they're discovered.
Also bestellen Sie die Dinger mit Farbfiltern und allem drum und dran Maurits, ik wil hier zuhören, dat wil ze doch.
Who knows what would have happened if the Nazis hadn't broken up the group because 3 of them were Jewish. They were already doing U.S. tours, and in fact it was their celebrity that helped the Jews in the group escape the worst of the Holocaust. This movie isn't just about the collapse of a promising singing group, of course. It's one way of bringing back historical memory of a painful time, and it's also full of the joy of life. I hope you find it in the video stores. Good luck, good viewing.
Second chance, oh, you give me a second chance. I can feel the wind beneath my wings once again. And when no one else would care, all the others, they just stared. You took me in and you gave me a second chance. You see, once I soared high above the trees late at night, with only the moonlight to guide my way. Oh, but something went wrong and I was no longer strong. It looked like I was earthbound to stay. And I was covered in dry mud, I was weak, I was confused. I guess you could say I was quite a mess. And I had lost the sight from one of my eyes. To tell the truth, I feared for my life. But second chance, oh, you give me a second chance. And I can feel the wind beneath my wings once again. And when no one else would care, or the others, they just stared. You took me in and you gave me a second chance. And it was on Christmas Eve when I arrived at your door. You reached out with loving hands and heart. And by the time the spring came, I'd regained all my strength. So you released me back into the night. And this is my thank you for all that you did, and all that you give of yourself. And to my sisters and my brothers of the night and of the wild, to those whose lives you touch every day. We need a second chance, you know we all need a second chance. Feel the wind beneath our wings once again. So whether you're an owl or a bear, maybe a human or a deer, all we really need is a second chance. Sometimes all we really need is that second chance.
I'd like to welcome you, Steve Gelman.
Hi, thank you.
Musical traditions portion of Tacoma Coffee House. Let me guess, that one was called Second Chance?
Yes, or The Ballad of Dusty the Owl.
Okay. Now, you've been living in this area so far all your life.
Yes.
Montgomery County.
Yes.
Now, we were talking backstage that song has a particular meaning that may not be evident to people listening to it.
Yeah, I wrote that for the Second Chance Wildlife Center in Gaithersburg, Maryland. They do wonderful work there. A lady named Chris, she started it out of the back of her house some 25, 30 years ago. It's a big thing now, and they help a lot of injured wildlife.
Yeah, I'm sure most people don't realize that exists. I think you said something that you needed to write this song because
the animals can't tell them thank you on the way out the door. So these volunteers and people that work there, it's a thankless job.
Yeah,
so,
and in a sense, that's truly the folk process, in that you're you're sort of reporting the news here.
Sure. Right.
And in this case, for people that can't give the news directly, or animals that can't give it directly. If you were taking a bus trip somewhere and a guy sitting next to you said, "Hey, so Sonny, what do you do for a living?" Well, how would you answer that?
Oh, I'd say I'm a singer-songwriter, a troubadour. I love folk music.
He'd say, what? What do you mean, a singer-songwriter? What is that?
I'll say I play the guitar, I write songs, I sing songs, and I have a great time.
And you're part of the new movement, the sort of yet another cyclical nature of emerging singer-songwriters.
Right. Yeah.
It's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of great ones in D.C. area here.
Yeah, and it's a lot of song swaps, things like that. You get your buddy Jamie to come in.
Yes, Jamie Daly.
On mandolin.
Great guy, great mandolin player. I feel really lucky to have him playing with me.
That sounds good. What's the last song you're going to do?
We're going to do a new song from a new CD I'm working on right now, and it's a love song. You always got to have one of those.
At least one.
Yeah.
Maybe two. What's it called?
This is called We Still Dance.
Okay, take it away.
Thank you.
Touch your sweet face and I stroke your hair. It's amazing to me after all these years how I can still feel so much love. Feel just like a schoolboy having his first crush. I look into your eyes, they're a calm blue sea. With a smile so wide, you've always been there for me. No, we'll make it that, we'll pull through. Long as we're together, there's nothing we can't do. So dim the lights and turn on the music. I light the candles and pour the wine. We'll start a fire to ignite the passion, and we still dance to the radio late at night. Now the days gone by where you haven't said you love me. Now the nights gone by where we've been apart. If I had the chance to do it again, well, I'd still choose you time and time again. So dim the lights and turn on the music. I light the candles and pour the wine. We'll start a fire to ignite the passion, and we still dance to the radio late at night. Dim the lights and turn on some music. I light the candles and pour the wine. We'll throw another log on the fire, and we still dance to the radio late at night.
Hi, and welcome to Body and Soul. It used to be you were automatically cheered when you talked about bringing baseball back to Washington. Not so anymore. The reason? Money. Sports stadiums cost money, and the fear is that it will cost you and me money. To find out more, we've gone to downtown Baltimore, on location, home of two big sports houses, one for the Orioles, one for the Ravens. John Morgan is standing here with me. He's from the Baltimore Sun, well-schooled in both sports and business. We're standing next to the statue of Babe Ruth, but this is not the house that Babe Ruth built, is it? Somebody else built it.
That's right. The taxpayers of Maryland are primarily responsible for both of these stadiums.
Camden Yards was the first one built, correct? It was built in the early 90s. A lot of publicity. This was going to restore the vitality of Baltimore. Is that what happened?
One of the most ambitious attempts by a city, and one of the first cities to do it, to invest heavily in sports with the idea of bringing economic activity back to a dying downtown.
Specifically, how much did it cost? Where did the money come from? Who ultimately paid for it?
Well, the stadium itself cost $100 million to build, and the land underneath it was another $100 million. And that included relocating a couple of dozen businesses that were here. This used to be an industrial park. So the baseball stadium itself is about $200 million, and you toss in the football stadium next door, and it's a $500 million investment. Some of that came from federal taxpayers for road work. Much of it came from the city in a $1 million a year subsidy that they pay to the state agency that built these stadiums. And then the bulk of it, the bonds are being repaid by taxpayers who buy lottery tickets. 4 times a year, the Maryland State Lottery game is dedicated to paying off these bonds, and you have stadium games. The team owners made small contributions to both stadiums. The Orioles paid $9 million, which was the cost of outfitting their skyboxes. And this is, of course, the stadium opened before Peter Angelos bought it. But the state even loaned them the money for that. So that was a low-interest loan that they received to pay their $9 million share. So it's almost entirely public financing. Now, some of the supporters will say, well, it's not tax financing because it's primarily lottery game money. But that begs the issue that if people weren't buying the lottery games dedicated to the sports stadiums, they would be buying other lottery tickets, and that money would be going into the general fund.
So this is fundamentally all public money coming from you and me, not exactly tax money, but public money, money that could be spent elsewhere.
Yeah, and for that matter, the private money that finds its way down here in the terms of ticket money, fans spending money, even the ticket taxes, 10% ticket tax all the fans pay, that money presumably would be finding its way into the coffers through other things if people were spending that money at restaurants or bars or bowling alleys in town.
Art Modell, did he kick in anything in the end?
Art Modell contributed about essentially $12 million. It's called $24 million, and it's a little complicated, but he was obligated under a state law that was passed in '96 to contribute $24 million over 30 years. And what they determined was that they would take the present value of that. The terms were not specified in the law. So the stadium authority in its negotiations with the team determined that $12 million was actually, the $24 million was actually $12 million in present value. So he's paying, he paid $10 million last year and will be paying $2 million over the next few years. So essentially he's contributed $12 million to that $230 million project.
Peanuts, in other words.
Yeah, small amount. Good deal for him.
You mentioned earlier Peter Angelos, he's getting an ongoing subsidy, essentially still making money off of the public dole.
There's a silent subsidy for all these stadiums you tend to find if you look closely at their leases. And in the case of the Orioles, it's particularly egregious that the taxpayers fund the operation of the stadium, and the team pays pays its rent based on percentage of certain revenues, a certain percentage of all tobacco products, certain percentage of ticket sales, things like that. So in recent years, despite the box office success that the Orioles have had, the team has actually paid less in rent than the state has paid to operate the stadium.
Despite Baltimore's experiences, Washington is gung-ho for a baseball stadium. There's again talk of revitalizing Washington, all sorts of promises. And we've sent our reporter Brad Shelgren to find out more, and here's his report.
Natural fit, and soon may be again. Washington, D.C., the largest city in the country without Major League Baseball, could be getting a team. Along with Northern Virginia and Charlotte, North Carolina, DC is trying to lure away the attendance-starved Montreal Expos. If DC succeeds, who will pay for the stadium?
I will tell you one thing, we will not use the model for either Camden Yards or Raven Stadium, where close to 100% of the money came from public sources, because that is it's just something that would not be in the best interest of the district.
True, 100% of the stadium's cost would not come out of the public's pocket. However, if a stadium is built downtown, as much as 60% of the funding could fall on the taxpayers. There are a number of possible stadium sites in D.C. Perhaps the leading one is at Mount Vernon Square, or maybe an old stadium can be renovated.
According to the D.C. Sports Commission's analysis, whether a new stadium is constructed downtown or if RFK is renovated, Major League Baseball will be an economic hit for the District of Columbia.
Baseball in Washington could generate up to $108 million a year in new revenues that otherwise would not come into the district, that it would create 2,100 new jobs, that it would generate $55 million in new salaries.
According to the Stadium Commission, a new stadium in D.C. would generate over $100 million in new spending and create 2,100 new jobs. No promises, but the Commission says as many as 35% of the new workers could be district residents. On balance, would a new D.C. stadium be an economic benefit or liability to the local community? Perhaps the Baltimore experience is instructive. For the Coffee House, I'm Brad Shelgren.
Okay, thank you, Brad. John, you've heard here that the promoters in Washington are promising a $100 million shot in the arm for the economy. Other promises as well, jobs, and so forth. What was Baltimore's turnout? What was the payoff for Baltimore?
That's a widely disputed question, frankly. The supporters of the stadium, which is chiefly the state that built it, have produced studies saying that there are thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars finding their way into the city that wouldn't otherwise be here. But all the independent economists I'm aware of who've looked at that question say that's just not true, that the money that gets spent at a stadium is money that's not being spent elsewhere in the community. And in fact, if you look at, if you talk to people who operate bowling alleys and movie theaters, they'll tell you that during the baseball strike in '95, they actually received an upturn in business. And that's good evidence that money that gets spent on sports is discretionary money. That's money we would spend on our own entertainment somewhere else. So the idea that you're generating new jobs and new dollars is widely disputed by private economists.
All right, so there's this idea that you put a stadium in and not only will the people come, but the jobs will come, the stores will pop up. Is that what we've seen here next to Camden Yards, next to Raven Stadium?
No, in fact, the opposite has happened. The state has actually purchased some of the companies in the area surrounding the football stadium to put in parking, so jobs have left the state, or left the city anyway. That stands to reason when you stop and think that a stadium is open very few times a day, or very few times a year. In the case of a baseball stadium, it's 81 times, a football stadium maybe 10 times, for 2 or 3 hours at a time. So essentially, for all practical purposes, stadiums are big empty buildings. So if you're looking to locate a business near a place where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, this is probably the last place in the city you would do it. And the test of that is anyone who walks around the stadium will see that the businesses here, most of them were here before the stadium was built. There's a sports bar across the street that changed its name, but it was a bar prior to this. There's a company that processes hospital waste. There's a Staples office equipment supply store across from left field. So no, if you walked around these stadiums, you'd find very little in the way of tangible impact from the stadiums attracting businesses.
So the bar owners really have to hope that the 50,000 people who come to an Orioles game will also all show up in their bar at the same time, or before and after the game.
Exactly, and in fact, these stadiums are built with the idea of capturing that money. So if you stop on your way to a game and have dinner or drink a beer, that's money that is lost to the team owners, and they do everything they can to prevent that by offering a wide assortment of food and beer, microbrews. Or, for example, here we have microbrew stands at the stadium. So these stadiums, these modern stadiums, are really built to capture that revenue and not let it leak out into surrounding businesses.
Okay, when all is said and done then, all these negatives, is there anything positive to be said for building a stadium? Is there a plus?
Well, I think the best way to view stadiums today is really as entertainment assets or cultural assets. And there's no question Baltimore is a more fun place to live because of this investment. So there is an enhanced quality of life. I think people think more of their own city, Baltimoreans, because of these stadiums. Those that don't feel like they were taken for a ride in the sense of their tax dollars being used. So there's no question that there's a positive benefit and that sports can play a positive role as a mucilage to a culture and a energizing impact, something that people can gather around and root for the home team. But the costs are inordinate.
Advice for the city of Washington, John, you got any?
I would be wary of claims that this is going to revive a downtown, and that's the chief claim that these stadium proponents use. And I would offer to give them a tour of Baltimore, where you have a city that, despite some resurgence in the center core and the inner harbor, remains at the bottom of all the national rankings of urban ills, whether it's syphilis or children born with AIDS or anything else. So if there's been a revival of cities related because of sports stadiums, we haven't seen it here in Baltimore.
Thank you, John. Very enlightening.
Thank you.
I'm Howard Cohen, coming to you from downtown Baltimore at Camden Yards. This has been Body and Soul. Thank you.
That's it for the November edition. See you next month in the Coffee House.